The December wind howled through El Dorado Canyon, Nevada, cutting through the makeshift settlement like a knife through butter. And Ophelia Marshall stood at her frozen well with empty buckets in both hands, wondering how much longer she could survive on melted ice before her body simply gave up. She had been a widow for 3 months now, ever since Thomas had gotten himself killed in a saloon fight over a card game that had gone wrong. The irony was not lost on her that he had left her with nothing but debts, a crumbling shack on the edge of town, and a well that had frozen solid 2 weeks ago when the unusual cold snap hit the territory. She was 24 years old and already felt ancient, worn down by grief that was complicated by anger at a man who had loved whiskey and gambling more than he had ever loved her. Ophelia lowered the buckets and stared down into the darkness of the well shaft. She could see the glint of ice maybe 15 feet down, solid and unyielding. She had tried everything: hot water, rocks, even a pickaxe, but the ice only seemed to grow thicker with each passing day. The other townspeople had wells that ran deep enough to avoid the freeze, or they lived close enough to the Colorado River to haul water from there. But Ophelia's property sat on the far western edge of the settlement, isolated and forgotten, just like she was. She wrapped her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned back toward the house. The sun was barely cresting the eastern mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that seemed almost offensive in their beauty. How dare the world be beautiful when she was struggling just to have enough water to make coffee? Inside the shack, Ophelia built up the fire in the stove and set a pot of snow to melt. It was a slow, tedious process, and the water always tasted faintly of dust and mineral, but it was all she had. She measured out precious coffee grounds, rationing them carefully. At the rate she was going through her supplies, she would be out of everything within a month. And then what? She had no money, no family, and no prospects. Thomas's debts had eaten up what little savings they had possessed. She was stirring the melting snow when she heard the sound of a horse outside. Ophelia tensed immediately. Visitors this early usually meant trouble. Creditors, or worse, men who thought a widow living alone was an easy target for their unwanted attentions. She grabbed the rifle from beside the door and checked that it was loaded before carefully peering through the gap in the curtain. A man sat astride a chestnut mare, his hat pulled low over his face. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in the typical garb of a working cowboy: dusty pants, a heavy coat, worn boots. As she watched, he dismounted with an easy grace and walked toward her well, leading the horse behind him. Ophelia's finger moved to the trigger. If he was planning to steal something, he was in for a surprise. But the man did not look toward the house at all. Instead, he pulled 2 large water barrels from his saddle bags and set them carefully on the ground beside her well. Then, without a word, without even a glance in her direction, he mounted his horse and rode away, heading back toward the main part of town. Ophelia stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what she had just witnessed. Then she set the rifle down and rushed outside, her heart pounding. The barrels were there, solid and real, filled to the brim with clear, clean water. She knelt beside them and touched the surface with trembling fingers. It was cold but not frozen, pure and beautiful. There had to be at least 10 gallons here, maybe more, enough for days. She looked in the direction the man had ridden, but he was already gone, disappeared into the warren of buildings that made up El Dorado Canyon. Who was he? Why had he done this? Ophelia lifted one of the barrels, grunting at the weight, and managed to half carry, half drag it into the house. She would have to make a second trip for the other one. As she poured the precious water into her own containers, Ophelia's mind raced with questions. The water was worth money out here, especially now with the freeze. No one gave away something this valuable without expecting something in return. She felt a knot of anxiety form in her stomach. What would this stranger want from her? But the next morning, the same thing happened. Ophelia woke before dawn, as had become her habit, and she was stoking the fire when she heard the soft sound of hoofbeats. She rushed to the window and saw the same man, riding the same chestnut mare, carrying 2 more barrels. He set them down beside the empty ones from the day before, picked up those empties, tied them to his saddle, and rode away without making a sound. This time, Ophelia ran outside in her nightgown and wrapper, her feet bare despite the frozen ground. "Wait," she called out. "Sir, please wait." But either he did not hear her or he chose not to stop. He kept riding, his back straight, his hat pulled low. Ophelia stood shivering in the cold dawn, watching him disappear once again. The pattern continued. Every morning, just after sunrise, the cowboy came with fresh water. He never spoke, never knocked on her door, never even looked at the house. He simply left the water and took away the empty barrels. Ophelia tried waiting outside for him, tried calling out, tried leaving a note on one of the barrels asking who he was and what he wanted. But he never responded. The note was still there when he brought the next delivery, undisturbed. After a week of this, Ophelia's confusion had given way to a kind of frustrated curiosity. She asked around town, being careful not to seem too interested. From the description she gave, the general store owner suggested it might be Cole Westfield, a ranch hand who worked at the Double Cross Ranch about 5 miles south of town. The store owner spoke well of him. Quiet, hardworking, kept to himself mostly but was reliable and honest. Lost his family some years back, the store owner added, his voice dropping. Fire, I heard. Wife and baby daughter. He has not been quite the same since, but he works hard and does not cause trouble. Ophelia felt something twist in her chest at that, so he understood loss then. He knew what it was to be alone. But that still did not explain why he was helping her. She tried to catch him one morning, getting up even earlier and standing by the well in the freezing pre-dawn darkness. But somehow he knew or sensed her presence, and he did not come that day. The next morning, when she stayed inside, he returned to his routine. It was maddening. It was mysterious. And despite herself, Ophelia found she was thinking about the silent cowboy more and more. She found herself listening for the sound of his horse, watching the sunrise and wondering what he looked like beneath the brim of that hat. Why he had chosen to help her when everyone else in this town had turned their backs on her the moment Thomas died. 2 weeks into this strange arrangement, the water situation in El Dorado Canyon grew worse. The freeze had not let up, and now even some of the deeper wells were starting to show ice. People began hauling water from the river in earnest, forming long lines with buckets and barrels. Ophelia went down one day to see the situation for herself and was immediately confronted by Mrs. Gunderson, the banker's wife, a sour-faced woman who had never approved of Ophelia's marriage to Thomas. "I am surprised to see you here," Mrs. Gunderson said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I would have thought you would have left town by now, what with your situation." "My situation is none of your concern," Ophelia replied, keeping her voice level. "Well, I suppose you will be needing charity soon enough. Unless you plan to sell that property, though I cannot imagine who would want it." Mrs. Gunderson sniffed. "That well of yours is worthless from what I hear." Ophelia bit her tongue to keep from responding. Let the old gossip think what she wanted. The truth was that Ophelia had plenty of water, thanks to her mysterious benefactor, and she was not about to share that information with someone who would only use it against her. She made her way back home, her mind churning. Mrs. Gunderson was right about one thing. Ophelia could not stay here indefinitely. Eventually, she would need to make a decision about her future. But what options did she have? She had no skills beyond basic housekeeping and cooking. She could try to find work as a domestic servant, but jobs like that were scarce in a town this small, and most families preferred to hire girls fresh from the East, not widows with questionable reputations. That evening, as she prepared a simple supper of beans and cornbread, Ophelia made a decision. Tomorrow, she would not hide inside when the cowboy came. She would confront him directly, force him to speak to her, to explain himself. She could not keep accepting his help without understanding why he was giving it, but when morning came and she heard the hoofbeats, her courage faltered. She stood by the door, her hand on the latch, her heart pounding. What would she say? What if he was offended by her questions? What if he stopped bringing the water? The hoofbeats stopped. She heard the soft thud of the barrels being set down. Her hand tightened on the latch. Now. She had to do it now. Ophelia flung open the door and stepped outside. The cowboy was already mounting his horse, the empty barrels secured to his saddle. In the early morning light, she could see him more clearly than before. He was young, maybe 30 at most, with dark hair visible beneath his hat and a lean, weathered face. His hands were strong and capable on the reins. "Please," she said, her voice carrying across the cold air. "Please just tell me why you are doing this." The cowboy paused. For a moment she thought he might actually stop, might turn around and speak to her. His shoulders tensed and his head tilted slightly, as though he were listening. But then he clicked his tongue, the mare moved forward, and he rode away without a word. Ophelia felt tears of frustration prick at her eyes. She had never been the kind of woman who cried easily. But this whole situation was pushing her to the edge of her endurance. She did not understand what was happening, did not understand this man or his motives, and the not knowing was driving her mad. She spent the day working around the house, trying to keep busy. She patched holes in her clothing, organized her dwindling supplies, and even attempted to bake bread, though her stores of flour were running dangerously low. As evening approached, she made another decision. If he would not speak to her, then she would find him. She would ride into town, locate this Cole Westfield, and demand an explanation face to face. The next morning, after the water delivery, Ophelia dressed in her best remaining dress, pinned up her auburn hair as neatly as she could manage, and set out on foot toward town. She did not have a horse anymore. Thomas had sold it months before he died to pay gambling debts. The walk was long and cold, but Ophelia was used to hardship by now. El Dorado Canyon was bustling with its usual morning activity when she arrived. Miners heading to and from their claims, shopkeepers opening their stores, women hurrying about their errands. Ophelia made her way to the saloon, knowing that even at this hour she might find ranch hands there, having a drink before heading out to their work. She was right. Inside the dim interior, she spotted 3 men at the bar. She approached the bartender, a grizzled man named Pete who had always been civil to her. "I am looking for Cole Westfield," she said quietly. "Do you know where I might find him?" Pete gave her a long look, then jerked his chin toward one of the men at the bar. "That is him there. The one on the end." Ophelia's breath caught. The man Pete had indicated was nursing a cup of coffee, his hat on the bar beside him. Even from behind, she recognized the set of his shoulders, the dark hair. It was definitely her mysterious water-bearer. She approached slowly, her heart hammering. When she was a few feet away, she cleared her throat. "Mr. Westfield," the man turned, and for the first time, Ophelia got a clear look at his face. He had gray eyes striking against his tanned skin and a day's worth of stubble on his jaw. There were lines around his eyes that spoke of long hours squinting into the sun, and a sadness in his expression that seemed permanently etched there. He was handsome in a rough, worn kind of way, and when his eyes met hers, Ophelia felt something unexpected flutter in her chest. "Madam," he said, his voice low and gravelly from disuse. "I need to speak with you," Ophelia said, keeping her voice steady. "About the water you have been bringing me." Something flickered in his eyes, but he did not seem surprised that she had tracked him down. He nodded once and stood, dropping a few coins on the bar. "Outside," he said simply. They walked out into the cold morning air. Cole led her around the side of the building, away from the main street, where they could have some privacy. He leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, waiting for her to speak. "Why are you doing this?" Ophelia asked, dispensing with any pleasantries. "Why are you bringing me water every morning? What do you want from me?" Cole was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her face. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she had to lean in to hear him. "Your husband owed mine a debt," he said, "before he died." Ophelia felt her stomach drop. Of course, it always came back to Thomas and his debts. "How much?" she asked wearily. $50, Cole said. It might as well have been 500. Ophelia had maybe $3 to her name. "I do not have that kind of money," she said. "I do not have any money." "I know," Cole said. There was no judgment in his voice, just a simple statement of fact. "Then why are you helping me?" Ophelia asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "If you are trying to collect the debt, water will not pay for it." Cole looked away, his jaw tightening. "I am not trying to collect," he said. "I am trying to make it right." "Make what right?" "I saw you that first morning," Cole said slowly, as though the words were being pulled from him against his will. "At your well, you looked like you were about to give up, and I thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "I thought about my wife. About how she would have wanted someone to help her if she had been in that situation. And I thought about your husband, how he lost that money playing cards with me. How maybe if I had not won, he would not have gotten into that fight that killed him." Ophelia stared at him, pieces clicking into place. "You were at the card game that night," Cole nodded, his expression grim. "I walked away before the fight started, but I heard about it the next day, and I heard he had a wife he left behind with nothing." "So this is guilt," Ophelia said flatly. "You are bringing me water out of guilt." "Maybe," Cole admitted. "At first. But then I kept coming back, and I saw you trying so hard to survive, to keep going even when everything was against you. And I thought you deserved better than to be left alone with nothing." Ophelia felt tears threatening again, but she blinked them back angrily. "I do not want your pity," she said. "It is not pity," Cole said, and for the first time there was something like heat in his voice. "It is respect. You are stronger than half the men in this town and twice as stubborn. I have been watching you survive with nothing, and I figure the least I can do is make sure you have water." They stood in silence for a moment, the cold wind whipping around them. Ophelia did not know what to say. She had expected demands or propositions or any of the 100 other things men seemed to want from women in her position. But respect, that was something she had not anticipated. "Thank you," she finally said, the words feeling inadequate, "for the water, for telling me the truth." Cole nodded. He pushed off from the wall and settled his hat back on his head. "I will keep bringing it," he said, "until the thaw comes and your well is working again." "You do not have to," Ophelia said, though part of her was terrified he would take her at her word and stop. "I know," Cole said. "But I will anyway." He started to walk away, but Ophelia called after him. "Mr. Westfield, why would you never speak to me before? Why all the silence?" Cole turned back, and for the first time, something that might have been a smile ghosted across his face. "I did not think you would want to talk to me," he said. "The man who helped ruin your husband." "My husband ruined himself," Ophelia said firmly. "That was not your doing." Cole studied her for another long moment, then nodded slowly. "Maybe so," he said. "Good day, Mrs. Marshall." "Ophelia," she said impulsively. "You can call me Ophelia." "Ophelia," he repeated, and the way he said her name, soft and careful, made her heart do that strange flutter again. "I am Cole." "I know," she said, and this time she was the one who almost smiled. After that day, things changed. Cole still brought the water every morning, but now when Ophelia came outside, he would nod to her, sometimes even say a quiet morning. It was not much, but it felt like progress, like they were building something, even if neither of them could quite name what it was. Christmas came and went with little fanfare. Ophelia spent the day alone, as she had expected, but in the evening she found a small bundle on her doorstep. Inside was a pound of coffee, a sack of flour, and a jar of honey. There was no note, but she knew who it was from. She sat at her small table and cried, not from sadness but from the overwhelming feeling of being seen, of mattering to someone in this harsh, unforgiving place. The new year of 1883 arrived with more cold and more ice. Ophelia's supplies continued to dwindle, and she knew she was going to have to do something soon. She could not keep living on the occasional charity from Cole, no matter how grateful she was for it. She needed to find work, needed to find a way to support herself. She was pondering this problem one morning in mid-January when Cole arrived with the water. This time, instead of just setting down the barrels and leaving, he hesitated, as though he wanted to say something. "Yes," Ophelia prompted, stepping out onto the porch despite the cold. Cole cleared his throat. "I heard the hotel is looking for someone to help with laundry and cleaning," he said. "If you are looking for work." Ophelia felt a rush of gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I will go see them today." Cole nodded, then hesitated again. "I could drive you into town," he offered. "If you want, save you the walk." It was a small thing, but Ophelia recognized it for the overture it was. "I would like that," she said. So after Cole finished his delivery, Ophelia grabbed her shawl and locked up the house, and Cole helped her up onto his horse. She sat behind him, her arms around his waist for balance, and tried not to think about how solid and warm he felt, how long it had been since she had been this close to another person. The ride into town was silent, but it was a comfortable silence. When they arrived at the hotel, Cole helped her down, his hands firm on her waist. Their eyes met for a moment, and Ophelia felt that flutter in her chest again, stronger this time. "Thank you," she said. "Good luck," Cole replied. The hotel manager, a harried woman named Mrs. Chen, who had come west from San Francisco, was grateful for the help and hired Ophelia on the spot. The pay was not much, but it was something, and it included one meal a day. Ophelia started immediately, spending the rest of the morning scrubbing floors and washing linens. It was hard work, but Ophelia did not mind. It felt good to be useful, to be earning her own way. And when Cole came by at the end of the day to give her a ride home, she felt something she had not experienced in months: hope. Over the next few weeks, a routine developed. Cole would bring water in the morning, and often he would drive Ophelia into town for her work. In the evenings, he would be there to bring her home. They talked more now, small conversations about the weather, about the town, about nothing in particular. But Ophelia found herself looking forward to these moments, to the sound of Cole's voice and the rare occasions when he smiled. She learned more about him in bits and pieces. He had come west from Missouri after the war, looking for a fresh start. He had met his wife, Sarah, in Colorado, and they had been happy for 3 years before the fire that killed her and their daughter, Emma, who had been only 2 years old. Cole had been working late that night, and by the time he returned, there was nothing left but ashes. "I should have been there," he said one evening as they rode back to her house, his voice raw. "I should have saved them." "You could not have known," Ophelia said gently, her arms tightening around his waist. "It was not your fault." "I tell myself that," Cole said. "But it does not make it easier." Ophelia understood. She felt the same complicated mix of grief and anger about Thomas, about all the ways he had failed her and failed himself. "My husband was not a good man," she found herself confessing. "I know I am supposed to mourn him, to remember him fondly, but the truth is that I am angrier at him for dying and leaving me with nothing than I am sad that he is gone." Cole was quiet for a moment, then said, "That does not make you a bad person. That makes you honest." It was a relief to say it out loud, to have someone understand. Ophelia felt something loosening in her chest, some tight knot of shame and guilt that had been choking her for months. As January turned to February, the cold finally began to ease. The ice in the wells started to melt, and people stopped talking quite so much about the unusual freeze. But Cole kept bringing water to Ophelia every morning, even though by now her well was starting to thaw. One morning in late February, Ophelia woke to the sound of dripping water. She rushed outside to find that the ice in her well had finally broken up, and she could see water flowing freely at the bottom. She lowered a bucket and pulled it up, laughing with relief and joy. When Cole arrived with his barrels, she met him with a wide smile. "Look," she said, pointing to the well, "it is thawed. I have water again." Cole looked at the well, then at her, and for a moment Ophelia saw something like disappointment cross his face. "That is good," he said quietly. "That is real good." "Cole," Ophelia said, a sudden panic rising in her chest. "You will still come visit, will you not? You will not just disappear now that I do not need the water anymore." Cole was silent for a long moment, his hands gripping the reins of his horse. Then he looked at her, really looked at her, and Ophelia saw something raw and vulnerable in his gray eyes. "I have been coming here every morning for 3 months," he said slowly, "and it stopped being about the water a long time ago." Ophelia's breath caught. "What is it about then?" Cole dismounted, leaving his horse standing patiently. He walked toward her, and Ophelia's heart began to pound. When he was standing directly in front of her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, he said, "It is about you. It has been about you since that first day. I saw you standing at this well, looking like you were ready to fight the whole world with your bare hands if you had to." "Cole," Ophelia whispered. And then somehow she was in his arms, his mouth on hers, and she was kissing him back with all the loneliness and longing and need that had been building inside her for months. It was not a gentle kiss. It was fierce and desperate, a collision of two people who had been starving for human connection and had finally found it in each other. Cole's hands tangled in her hair, and Ophelia gripped his coat, pulling him closer, never wanting to let go. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry," he said. "I should not have. Do not apologize," Ophelia said firmly. "Do not you dare apologize for that." "I do not have much to offer you," Cole said, his voice rough. "I am just a ranch hand. I do not own land. I do not have savings. But I swear to you, Ophelia, if you will have me, I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never have to struggle alone again." Ophelia felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of happiness. "I do not need much," she said. "I just need you." They stood there in the cold February morning, holding each other, and Ophelia felt something shift inside her, like a door opening onto a future she had not dared to imagine. This was not the life she had planned, not the man she had expected, but standing here in Cole's arms, she realized it was exactly what she needed. Over the next few weeks, Cole courted Ophelia properly. He brought her flowers picked from the desert, took her on rides through the canyon, sat with her on her porch in the evenings and talked about everything and nothing. The townspeople gossiped, of course. They always did. But Ophelia found that she did not care what Mrs. Gunderson or anyone else thought. She was happy, truly happy for the first time in years. In late March, Cole asked Ophelia to marry him. They were sitting by the river, watching the water flow past, swollen with snowmelt from the mountains. He did not have a ring, but he had carved a small wooden bird for her, smooth and beautiful, a symbol of freedom and new beginnings. "I know it has not been long," Cole said, his voice nervous. "And I know people will talk, but I do not want to waste any more time, Ophelia. I have lost too much already. I do not want to lose you too." "You will not lose me," Ophelia said, taking the wooden bird and holding it close to her heart. "Yes, Cole, yes, I will marry you." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with just a few friends present. Ophelia wore a dress borrowed from Mrs. Chen, and Cole wore his best shirt and a new pair of pants he had bought special for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Cole kissed her with such tenderness that Ophelia felt her heart might burst. The marriage changed everything and nothing. Ophelia moved out of her small shack and into Cole's cabin on the Double Cross Ranch. It was not much bigger than what she had left behind, but it was clean and sturdy, and it was theirs. Cole continued to work as a ranch hand, and Ophelia kept her job at the hotel, saving every penny they could. The physical intimacy between them was a revelation for Ophelia. Thomas had been rough and selfish in bed, taking his pleasure without much concern for hers, but Cole was different. He was patient and attentive, learning her body like a language he wanted to master. He touched her with reverence, kissed her like she was precious, and made love to her with a passion that left them both breathless and tangled in the sheets. One night, a few weeks after their wedding, Ophelia lay in Cole's arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could be this happy," she whispered. Cole's arms tightened around her. "Neither did I," he admitted. "After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I thought I would just work until I was too old to work anymore, and then I would die alone. But then I saw you, and something in me woke up again." "I am glad you saw me," Ophelia said, tilting her head up to kiss his jaw. "I am glad you brought me water every morning without a word, until I was brave enough to demand words from you." Cole chuckled, the sound rumbling through his chest. "You were always brave," he said. "That is what I loved about you from the start. Loved." The word hung in the air between them, and Ophelia's breath caught. They had not said it yet, not out loud, though she had felt it growing between them for weeks now. "Cole," she said softly. "Do you mean that?" He looked down at her, his gray eyes serious. "I mean it," he said. "I love you, Ophelia. I know it is fast, and I know it might seem crazy, but I love you with everything I have left in me." "I love you too," Ophelia said, and saying the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air, terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Do not be scared," Cole whispered, pulling her close. "I have got you. I will always have you." They made love again that night, slower this time, savoring each touch and kiss, whispering words of love and devotion in the darkness. Afterward, Ophelia drifted off to sleep feeling safe and cherished, two things she had never expected to feel again. Spring came to El Dorado Canyon in a rush of wildflowers and green growth. The desert, which had been so harsh and unforgiving during the winter, suddenly burst into life. Ophelia tended a small garden outside their cabin, growing vegetables and herbs. Cole built her a chicken coop, and they acquired 6 hens who provided them with fresh eggs. Life was not easy. It never was in the West, but it was good. Ophelia worked at the hotel 3 days a week, and on her days off, she helped around the ranch. Cole taught her to ride properly, and she learned to rope cattle and even to shoot a rifle with reasonable accuracy. The Double Cross Ranch was owned by a man named Henry Ballard, a gruff but fair boss who had always treated Cole well. When he learned that Cole had married, he offered them a slightly larger cabin on the property, one with 2 rooms instead of 1. Cole and Ophelia accepted gratefully, and they spent a weekend moving their few possessions and settling into the new space. "We could have a family here," Ophelia said one evening as they sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "There is room for children." Cole's hand tightened on hers. "Is that something you want?" he asked carefully. "Someday," Ophelia said. "Not right away, but someday, yes. I think I would like to have your children, Cole." She felt him relax beside her. "I would like that too," he said quietly. "I would like that very much." Summer arrived hot and dry. The river ran lower and the vegetation began to brown under the relentless sun. Ophelia kept her garden alive through sheer determination and careful watering. The hotel work was exhausting in the heat, but she pushed through, knowing that every dollar she earned brought them closer to their goal of saving enough to buy their own land someday. In July, Ophelia realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another week to be sure, then another before finally telling Cole. They were sitting at their small table, eating dinner after a long day of work. "Cole," she said, setting down her fork, "I think I might be pregnant." Cole froze, his eyes going wide. "You think or you know?" "I am fairly certain," Ophelia said. "I have not had my courses in 2 months, and I have been feeling queasy in the mornings." Cole stood up so abruptly that his chair fell over. For a moment, Ophelia was afraid she had upset him, that maybe he was not ready for this after all. But then he was around the table, pulling her to her feet and into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Are you happy?" she asked, her voice muffled against his chest. "Happy?" Cole pulled back to look at her, and Ophelia saw tears in his eyes. "Ophelia, I am terrified and thrilled and more happy than I have any right to be. I am going to be a father again." The word "again" hung in the air, and Ophelia understood the weight of it. This was a second chance for Cole, an opportunity to be the father he had not gotten to be for Emma. She reached up and cupped his face in her hands. "You are going to be a wonderful father," she said firmly. "I know you are scared, but we will do this together. We will protect this child and love this child, and everything will be all right." Cole nodded, then bent to kiss her, gentle and reverent. "Thank you," he whispered against her lips. "Thank you for giving me this." The pregnancy was not easy. Ophelia suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first 4 months, and the summer heat made everything worse. She had to quit her job at the hotel when she could no longer stand on her feet for long hours. Money became tighter, but Cole took on extra work whenever he could, and they made do. As Ophelia's belly grew, so did Cole's protectiveness. He fussed over her constantly, making sure she was not lifting anything heavy, that she was eating enough, that she was resting. It was sometimes annoying, but mostly it was endearing. This man who had been so silent and closed off when she first met him now could not stop talking to her, to their unborn child, whispering hopes and dreams and promises. In November, as the weather turned cold again, Ophelia went into labor. It was a long, difficult birth that lasted nearly 20 hours. Cole stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragement even when Ophelia was cursing him and every man who had ever lived. Finally, just before dawn, their son was born. He came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, and Ophelia fell in love with him instantly. Cole cut the cord with shaking hands, then held the baby while the midwife attended to Ophelia. "He is perfect," Cole said, his voice choked with emotion. He is absolutely perfect." They named him Daniel Thomas Westfield. The middle name was Ophelia's idea, a way of acknowledging the past without being beholden to it. Thomas Marshall had been a flawed man, but he had been part of Ophelia's journey, and without him, she would never have ended up here with Cole with this beautiful child. Daniel was a fussy baby who did not sleep much and demanded constant attention. Ophelia was exhausted, her body still recovering from the birth, and there were moments when she broke down crying from sheer, overwhelming fatigue. But Cole was there, taking night shifts with the baby, walking him around the cabin and singing off-key lullabies, changing diapers and never once complaining. "I do not know how you do this," Ophelia said one night, watching Cole rock Daniel back to sleep for the third time in as many hours. "I am making up for lost time," Cole said quietly. "I did not get to do this for Emma. I will not take a single moment with Daniel for granted." By the time Daniel was 3 months old, they had settled into a rhythm. Ophelia's body had healed and she had regained some of her strength. Daniel was still not a great sleeper, but he was alert and curious, with Cole's gray eyes and Ophelia's auburn hair. He smiled easily, especially at his father, and the sound of his laughter was the most beautiful thing Ophelia had ever heard. Spring came again, the second spring since Ophelia had stood at her frozen well and wondered how she would survive. Now, holding her son and watching her husband work in the field, she marveled at how much had changed. She thought about that silent cowboy who had brought her water every morning without a word, and she thought about the desperate widow she had been, and she felt a wave of gratitude so strong it nearly knocked her over. On a warm April afternoon, Cole came home from work to find Ophelia sitting on the porch with Daniel, who was now old enough to sit up with support. Cole kissed her hello, then knelt down to talk to his son, making silly faces that sent Daniel into peals of laughter. "I talked to Mr. Ballard today," Cole said, settling onto the porch beside Ophelia, "about buying some land." Ophelia's heart jumped. "And?" "He said there is a parcel about a mile from here that might be coming available. It has got good water, decent grazing land. He thinks we could get it for a fair price if we are interested." "How much?" Ophelia asked, already calculating their savings in her head. "More than we have right now," Cole admitted. "But he said he would loan us the difference and we could pay him back over time. He said I have been a good worker and he wants to help us get started." Ophelia felt tears prick at her eyes. "Cole, that is wonderful." "I have not said yes yet," Cole said. "I wanted to talk to you first. It would mean more work, harder times at first. We would be building everything from scratch. But it would be ours, Ophelia. Our land, our home, something to pass down to Daniel and any other children we might have." Ophelia did not hesitate. "Yes," she said. "Absolutely yes." They shook hands on the deal with Mr. Ballard the next day, and by May, they had acquired the deed to 40 acres of Nevada scrubland. It was not much to look at, rocky, dotted with sagebrush, harsh and unforgiving. But when Cole and Ophelia stood on it together, looking out at the distant mountains, it felt like the most beautiful place in the world. "This is ours," Ophelia whispered, squeezing Cole's hand. "This is ours," Cole agreed, "and we are going to make it into something." They lived in a tent on the property for the first 2 months while Cole built a small house. It was not much, just 2 rooms with a wood stove and a loft, but it was solid and well made. They dug a well, and when they hit water at 20 feet, Ophelia laughed at the irony. This well would never freeze, never leave her desperate and alone. Cole bought a small herd of cattle, just 10 head to start, and began building fences. Ophelia planted a larger garden and acquired more chickens. They worked from sunup to sundown, both of them exhausted but driven by the dream of what this place could become. Daniel grew into a happy, energetic toddler who loved to follow his father around and help with the chores. Cole was endlessly patient with him, teaching him about horses and cattle, letting him hold the hammer while they mended fences, carrying him on his shoulders while they checked on the herd. When Daniel was 2 years old, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. She continued working around the homestead until she was quite large, only stopping when Cole finally put his foot down and insisted she rest. Their daughter was born on a crisp October morning in 1885. The birth was much faster than Daniel's had been, and before Ophelia knew it, she was holding a tiny, perfect baby girl with a fuzz of dark hair and Cole's gray eyes. "What should we name her?" Cole asked, sitting beside Ophelia on the bed and staring at his daughter with wonder. "I was thinking Clara," Ophelia said. "Clara Sarah, after your mother and your first wife." Cole's eyes filled with tears. "You do not have to do that," he said hoarsely. "I want to," Ophelia insisted. "Sarah was your first love and she gave you Emma." "I am not trying to replace her or pretend she did not exist. This is our way of honoring her memory." Cole kissed Ophelia then, deep and grateful, before carefully taking Clara in his arms. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "Welcome to the family." Life on the homestead was hard work, but it was deeply satisfying. Each year, Cole added more cattle to the herd. Ophelia's garden flourished, and she began selling vegetables and eggs in town for extra money. They made improvements to the house, adding a proper kitchen and a third bedroom. They acquired 2 more horses, a cow for milk, and even a dog, a scruffy mutt named Scout who appointed himself guardian of the children. Daniel and Clara grew up wild and free, running barefoot through the desert, learning to ride before they could properly raid. Cole taught them both to rope and shoot, making no distinction between his son and daughter when it came to ranch work. Ophelia taught them letters and numbers, reading to them every night from the small collection of books they had accumulated. When Clara was 3 and Daniel was 5, Ophelia became pregnant a 3rd time. This pregnancy resulted in twins, 2 boys they named James and Samuel. The twins were a handful from the start, constantly getting into trouble and egging each other on. But they brought such joy and chaos into the household that no one minded too much. By 1890, the Westfield homestead was thriving. They had grown their herd to over 50 head of cattle, and they had acquired more land through a combination of purchase and homestead claims. Cole had hired 2 ranch hands to help with the work, and they had built a barn and a bunkhouse. Ophelia sometimes could not believe this was her life. When she looked around at her 4 children, at the house she and Cole had built together, at the land they had tamed through sheer determination, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She thought about that frozen well, about standing in the cold with empty buckets and no hope, and she marveled at how far she had come. One evening, after the children were finally in bed, Cole and Ophelia sat on their porch, watching the stars come out. Cole's arm was around her shoulders, and Ophelia leaned into his warmth. "You remember the first time you brought me water?" she asked softly. "I remember everything about those days," Cole said. "I remember how scared I was to approach you, how I convinced myself that you were better off not knowing who I was. I remember watching you from a distance and thinking you were the strongest person I had ever seen." "I was terrified," Ophelia admitted. "I did not know how I was going to survive the winter. And then you appeared like some kind of silent guardian angel and you saved me." "We saved each other," Cole corrected gently. "I was barely living before I met you, Ophelia. I was just going through the motions, waiting to die. But you gave me a reason to wake up in the morning, to want to build something, to hope again. Ophelia turned to look at him, this man who had transformed her life so completely. His hair was starting to gray at the temples now, and there were more lines around his eyes, but to her, he was as handsome as the day she had first seen him clearly in that saloon. "I love you," she said, the words as true now as they had been the first time she said them. "I love you more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Cole said, kissing her softly. "Every day for the rest of my life I will love you." They sat together in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert night. Inside, their children slept peacefully. Around them, the land they had built together stretched out in all directions. And above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, bearing witness to a love that had started with something as simple as water carried in silence, and had grown into something vast and enduring. The years continued to pass, bringing both challenges and triumphs. There was a drought in 1892 that tested them, forcing them to drive the cattle to higher ground to find grazing. There was a harsh winter in 1893 when they lost a third of their herd to cold and starvation. But they persevered, rebuilding each time, leaning on each other and on the community they had become part of. Daniel grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. He announced at 16 that he wanted to stay and help Cole run the place, a decision that filled Cole with pride. Clara, on the other hand, was fascinated by books and learning. When she was 15, Ophelia and Cole made the difficult decision to send her to a boarding school in Carson City so she could get a proper education. The twins, James and Samuel, were 14 now and still as wild as ever. They spent their days exploring the desert, hunting and fishing, and generally avoiding any chore they could. But they were good boys at heart, and Cole and Ophelia knew they would settle down eventually. In 1895, Daniel announced that he wanted to marry a girl from town named Margaret Bailey. Cole and Ophelia gave their blessing, and the wedding was held at the homestead in the spring, with what seemed like half of El Dorado Canyon in attendance. Watching his son get married, Cole felt the weight of time passing, the bittersweet realization that his children were growing up and starting lives of their own. "You feel old?" Ophelia asked him that night after all the guests had left and they were finally alone. "Ancient," Cole said with a laugh, "but also lucky, so incredibly lucky." "Me too," Ophelia said, snuggling against him, "though I would not mind if time slowed down a little." But time did not slow down. Clara finished school and decided to become a teacher, much to Ophelia's delight. She took a position at the school in El Dorado Canyon and moved back home, at least for a while. The twins grew taller and broader, eventually proving themselves to be capable ranch hands despite their earlier wildness. In 1898, Daniel and Margaret had their first child, a baby boy they named Cole after his grandfather. Holding his grandson for the first time, Cole broke down crying, overwhelmed by emotion. This tiny person was the continuation of everything he and Ophelia had built, the proof that their love and their work would endure beyond their own lifetimes. "Our first grandchild," Ophelia said softly, standing beside Cole and touching the baby's tiny hand. "I never thought I would live to see this day." "Why not?" Cole asked, looking at her in confusion. "Because when you first started bringing me water, I was not sure I would live to see the next week," Ophelia said honestly. "Everything that has happened since then, everything we have built, it all feels like a miracle." Cole shifted the baby so he could put his arm around Ophelia. "If it is a miracle, then you are the one who made it happen," he said. "Your strength, your determination, your love. That is what built all of this." They stood together, holding their grandson, and Ophelia thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a frozen well and silent water deliveries to this moment, surrounded by family and love and the fruits of years of hard work. It was more than she ever could have hoped for, more than she ever could have imagined. As the new century dawned in 1900, Cole and Ophelia were in their 40s, still active and involved in running the ranch, but beginning to think about slowing down. Daniel had taken over most of the day-to-day operations, and he was doing a fine job. Clara had married a fellow teacher and was expecting her first child. The twins had both decided to stay on the ranch, content with the life they knew. Ophelia had taken to writing down the story of her and Cole's life, wanting to preserve it for their children and grandchildren. She wrote about the frozen well, about Cole's silent water deliveries, about falling in love and building a life together. She wrote about the hard times and the good times, about the children they had raised and the land they had tamed. One evening, she showed the pages to Cole. He read them carefully, his expression growing more emotional with each paragraph. When he finished, he set the pages down and pulled Ophelia into his arms. "This is beautiful," he said, his voice thick. "You have captured it all perfectly." "I wanted them to know," Ophelia said. "I wanted our grandchildren to understand where they came from, how much we loved each other, how hard we fought to build this life." "They will know," Cole promised, "and they will be proud." In 1902, at the age of 44, Ophelia discovered she was pregnant again. It was completely unexpected. She had assumed her childbearing years were behind her, but there she was, growing rounder with what would be their 5th child. "I am too old for this," she complained to Cole, who was trying very hard not to laugh. "You are not old," Cole said. "You are just experienced." "This child is going to think we are its grandparents," Ophelia grumbled, but secretly she was pleased. There was something sweet about having another baby now, after all their other children were grown or nearly so. Their daughter Rebecca was born in early 1903, a surprise baby who was doted on by everyone. Daniel and Margaret's children played with their aunt, who was younger than they were. Clara brought her own daughter to visit and marveled at having a baby sister. The twins, now young men of 18, were surprisingly gentle with their tiny sister. "She has got all of us wrapped around her finger already," Samuel said, watching Rebecca sleep in her cradle. "That is what little girls do," Ophelia said with a smile. "Trust me, I know." Cole was absolutely besotted with Rebecca. After working so hard for so many years, he had more time now to devote to this surprise daughter. He carried her everywhere, talked to her constantly, and refused to let anyone else hold her for long stretches. "You are going to spoil her," Ophelia warned him. "Probably," Cole agreed, not looking even slightly repentant. "But she is my last baby, Ophelia. Let me enjoy it." Ophelia could not argue with that. She understood the bittersweet feeling of knowing this was the end of an era, the last time they would experience the miracle of a new life. So she let Cole spoil Rebecca, and she spoiled her a bit herself, and they both savored every moment. As Rebecca grew from baby to toddler to little girl, the homestead continued to prosper. They had expanded their operation to include horses as well as cattle, and the Westfield Ranch, as it was now known, had a reputation for quality livestock. They had built a larger house, one with enough room for visiting grandchildren and the occasional hired hand who needed a place to stay. In 1910, when Rebecca was 7 years old and already showing signs of inheriting her mother's stubbornness and her father's quiet determination, El Dorado Canyon held a celebration for Cole and Ophelia's 25th wedding anniversary. It seemed like the entire town turned out, along with friends from neighboring ranches and settlements. There were speeches and toasts, food and music. People talked about how Cole and Ophelia had arrived in the territory with nothing and had built an empire through hard work and determination. They talked about the Westfield children and grandchildren, about the contributions the family had made to the community. But the moment that mattered most to Ophelia was when Cole pulled her aside as the sun was setting, leading her away from the crowd to a quiet spot overlooking their land. 25 years, Cole said, shaking his head in wonder. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I was nervously leaving water barrels at your well. Other times it feels like you have been part of my life forever. Both things can be true, Ophelia said, leaning against him. I feel the same way. I want you to know, Cole said seriously, turning to face her, that every single day of these 25 years has been a gift. Even the hard days, even the days when we were struggling and scared, they were all worth it because I got to face them with you. Ophelia felt tears streaming down her face. I love you, she said. I have loved you since the moment you finally spoke to me in that alley behind the saloon. No, even before that. I think I started loving you when I realized someone cared enough about me to bring water every morning, even without knowing if I would ever acknowledge them. Cole kissed her then, soft and sweet, the kiss of two people who had weathered storms together and come out stronger for it. Behind them, they could hear the sounds of the celebration, children laughing, music playing, friends and family enjoying the evening. But in this moment, it was just the two of them, as it had always been, as it would always be. Let us go back, Ophelia said eventually. Our family is waiting. Our family, Cole repeated, smiling. I never get tired of hearing that. They walked back hand in hand, two people who had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances and had built a love that would endure for generations. Behind them, the sun set over the Nevada desert, painting the sky in shades of gold and red, a fitting backdrop for a love story that had started with ice and had been transformed by the simple, steady offering of water each morning. The years that followed were gentler ones. Cole and Ophelia stepped fully back from running the ranch, content to let Daniel and the twins handle the day-to-day operations while they enjoyed their grandchildren and watched Rebecca grow into a spirited young woman. They traveled a bit, visiting Clara in California, where she had moved with her husband, and taking a trip to Missouri to see the place where Cole had grown up. But they always returned to the homestead, to the land they had built together. It was home in a way that nowhere else could ever be. The well that Cole had dug all those years ago still provided fresh, clean water. The house they had built together still stood strong. And everywhere Ophelia looked, she saw evidence of the life they had created. Children and grandchildren, thriving livestock, fields that produced crops year after year. In 1915, on a warm spring evening, Cole and Ophelia sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Cole was 72 now and Ophelia was 61. They had both slowed down considerably, but they were still healthy, still active, still deeply in love. You have any regrets? Ophelia asked, a question she had never posed before. Cole thought about it for a long moment. I regret that I could not save Sarah and Emma, he said finally. I will always carry that with me, but I do not regret anything that happened after, not a single moment with you, not a single decision we made together. Do you? I regret marrying Thomas, Ophelia admitted. But I do not regret how it ended, because it led me to you. I do not regret the struggle or the hardship, because it taught me how strong I could be. And I certainly do not regret you, Cole Westfield. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. We are the best thing that ever happened to each other, Cole corrected, taking her hand. They sat in silence, watching the stars come out one by one. Ophelia thought about that young widow standing at a frozen well, desperate and alone. She thought about the silent cowboy who had decided to help her, who had brought water every morning without expecting anything in return. And she thought about all the years in between, all the love and laughter and tears and triumphs. "Thank you," she said softly. "For what?" Cole asked. "For the water," Ophelia said. "For seeing me when I felt invisible, for loving me when I felt unlovable, for building this life with me, for everything." Cole lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for letting me," he said. "Thank you for taking a chance on a broken man with nothing to offer but water and hope." "You offered me everything," Ophelia said. "You offered me a future when I could not see past the next day. You offered me love when I had forgotten what that felt like. You offered me a family and a home and a reason to keep fighting." They stayed on the porch until late into the night, holding hands and remembering. And when they finally went inside, moving slowly up the stairs to the bedroom they had shared for so many years, they were still holding hands, still together, still in love after all the years and all the changes. Cole lived to be 78 years old, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1921 with Ophelia beside him. His funeral was attended by what seemed like half of Nevada, all the people whose lives he had touched over the decades. His children and grandchildren mourned him deeply, but they also celebrated a life well lived, a man who had been devoted to his family and his land. Ophelia lived another 7 years after Cole's death, surrounded by her children and grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. She never remarried. Cole had been the love of her life, and she felt no need to replace him. Instead, she poured her energy into her family, into finishing the written account of her and Cole's life together, into making sure that their story would be remembered. She passed away in 1928 at the age of 74, in the house she and Cole had built, on the land they had claimed together. Her last words were reportedly, "Tell Cole I am coming," and she died with a smile on her face. They buried her beside Cole on a hill overlooking the homestead, with a simple stone that read, "Ophelia Marshall Westfield, 1854–1928. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she survived the ice and found love in the water." The Westfield Ranch continued to operate for generations, passed down through the family. The story of Cole and Ophelia became a family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The old well, the one Cole had dug after they bought the land, was eventually covered over for safety, but a marker was placed there to commemorate it, with an inscription. "Here flows the water of love and perseverance. May it never run dry," and it never did. The ranch prospered through depressions and droughts, through wars and changes in the world. The family grew and expanded, spreading across the West, but always remembering their roots, always coming back to the homestead to pay their respects, and to remember the story of the widow who had nothing but ice in her well, and the cowboy who brought water every morning without a word, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. In the end, it was a love story written in water and determination, in silence and persistence, in the harsh beauty of the Nevada desert. It was a story of two broken people who found each other and built something beautiful together. And it was a story that proved that sometimes the greatest love stories start not with grand gestures or passionate declarations, but with simple acts of kindness, repeated day after day, until they become the foundation of something enduring and true.